3, 2, 1. Welcome. This is Atheist Edge. I'm Jim. I'm joined by TJ and Dr. Richard Carrier. Unfortunately, you'll see a conspicuous absence of Dr. Kenny Rhodes. We're still trying to work out some bugs. Hopefully, he will show up late. In the meantime, we're going to kill a little time with our patented Atheist Edge, shotgun blast to the face, random questions, speed round for Richard Carrier, if you're up for it.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, first things first, let's get plugs out of the way. What have you been up to lately since last we spoke, and what's going on in the future?
Gosh, well, I did another Western tour. I do a lot of tours, driving all over the country. About every quarter. So if people are interested in seeing me, hanging out with me, getting a book signed, anything like that, sometimes I'm doing talks and debates as well. Just to keep an eye on my feeds. I'm on Twitter and Facebook. You can find everything through my website at richardcarrier.info. That's .info. And so I announce tours there. And also I'm teaching classes online, affordable stuff, 1 month online classes that have no live events. So you don't have to schedule anything. You just learn at your own pace and discuss. Basically, you get my full attention in a forum, you get to ask me all the questions you want. And then I ask you challenge questions about readings and that are assigned. And we discuss various things. And this includes subjects in philosophy and history. And starting March. When March starts, that's going to be my worldview building class, which is about how to be a better philosopher, which is rather than the history of philosophy stuff, it's about how to do philosophy, how to build a philosophy of life. And we go through my book, Sense and Goodness Without God, item by item, and critique it and think about it and ask questions about it and things like that, and other writings and readings as well.
Good grief.
So, people who are interested in that, wanting to hone their skills as a philosopher, which may relate to, here we go. What we're going to talk about today, which is theism and counter-apologetics and how to defend atheism as a worldview rather than just a lack of belief.
Richard, just to let everyone know that link, Kenny, your audio is really kind of loud. We're getting some feedback.
Okay, let me...
Yeah, just lower it and you should be great.
How's that? Is that better?
That should be great. All right, so Richard, that link, the richardcarrier.info is already in the description for everyone watching, so you can go ahead and click on that now. Also, would you care to talk about the Carrier Sheffield debate technique? And
yeah.
Okay.
So I just did this debate with Jonathan Sheffield, and the debate was really focused. It was on the long ending of Mark, whether it was authentic or a forgery or whatever. And the format of the debate was open-ended, long-term written debate. So basically, you write an entry, you write a rebuttal, you write an entry, you write a rebuttal. And then so we do this back and forth for months so that we accumulated about 12 entries in this whole debate. And each one is only 1,100 words, not counting citations and references and stuff. So each entry can be thoughtful. It can be researched. You can have citations and things like that. It's not too long, so it doesn't get bogged down in the weeds of a lot of digressions and things. You could really focus on what your disagreements are. And there's no hit and run stuff. You keep discussing it for a while and you get a really good hashing out of any particular debate subject. So it worked really well, and I haven't seen anyone do this kind of debate format for anything else, and I really want to do it for theism. So I'm looking for a PhD in a relevant field willing to defend theism using that format. And I have a blog entry that I posted just a couple days ago that explains everything about what that involves and so on.
Awesome. Kenny, we're still getting a little bit of an echo. I'm going to turn it over to you for any plugs or updates. What are you up to lately? What do you have planned? A little bit about yourself. A lot of it's already in the description section, but
okay. I've just been monkeying with this technological stuff, and I apologize for just coming in right at 5 o'clock. But is that okay? Are the levels okay there?
That sounds really good. That's a lot better. Okay.
Okay, I'm using my $2 mic, so hopefully it works. Let's see. Let me catch up here. I'm kind of discombobulated. I've trying to get all this stuff to work. I set out to do it earlier and then got lost for time. Let's see. What have I been doing? I'm working on a revision of my book. This guy here, The One Who Is, and trying to update that. And then I have another one that I'm working on as far as a book on the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas. And then I've been just doing a lot of stuff to prepare to go down to Reasons to Believe and contribute what I can contribute down there to the greater field of understanding science and theology, or faith and reason. And I go down there once or twice a year, and we all meet and strategize and talk about what's the best arguments to use, what not to use. And Reasons to Believe is quite a extensive organization. It's grown quite a bit over the years. And if anybody's interested, it's just reasons.org. I'm a visiting scholar there, so I'm not officially on staff in the sense of getting a paycheck, but I'm very much involved with them as far as my own personal work and contributing to what's going on down there with faith and reason, or science and scripture.
That's great. That Reasons to Believe, that link is already in the description as well. And
good. Good.
Yeah. Okay. So much for the random shotgun blast. We spared you the random questions, Richard. So we're good. This is an open-ended discussion. I believe this is a continuation from a non sequitur show you two did. So I didn't watch it. If you just want to pick up where you left off, it's open-ended, existence of God. So it's almost impossible to go on a tangent, a patented atheist edge tangent. So TJ and I are just going to sit here and look pretty. From time to time, we're going to throw out some questions and comments from the live chat. But other than that, it's just going to be you two. Whoever wants to go first.
Sure. Well, I just asked Dr. Carrier after we had chatted the first time, which for me, I got a phone call from Steve McRae about 2 hours before it was time to talk to Dr. Carrier. So I just had to jump in. I took a blind leap of faith in trading sabers with him over really a topic that is not my expertise at all. So I just invited him that maybe we could come and talk about an area that I do more of my own work in, which is the existence of God. So that's why we're here right now.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I did want to say, Dr. Carrier, you might as well just admit defeat, because I have a powerful argument here that is ironclad. It's irrefutable.
You have the silver bullet.
I just want to say, enough said. Enough said. Mic drop.
Banana drop.
I hope you know who Ray Comfort is. If not, that just looked really goofy.
Yeah. I actually debated him on Facebook. We had a text-based live debate, which the transcript of you can find on my website for people who are interested. So yes, I have debated. Oh, it was moral theory, in fact, with Ray Comfort.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You guys didn't get into the age of the earth or any of his young earth creationism stuff?
No, that didn't come up. At least not directly. I mean, he tried to push some of that in there, but it wasn't relevant to the debate, so it didn't get discussed very much.
Right. Well, I don't have really a plan as far as any kind of formal opening or anything like that, but I'm just curious as to why you think atheism is a more reasonable position.
Yeah, I think in general, it's more a question of, are the big religions true or false? So Christianity, for example, is one of the largest religions. Is why do people believe that? Why do I think that's false? And once you eliminate those, there's not a lot of enthusiasm left for other kinds of gods and theisms. And the evidence for those big religions, once it dissolves, the evidence for other kinds of gods also dissolves as well, I think, or at least we end up with no reason to believe in any of them. But people who want to follow up on this, and I'll give some summaries in a moment, can find my book, Why I'm Not a Christian, has like the really succinct reasons why I think Christianity is false. And I don't think there's anything like the Christian God. And for theisms in general, especially let's say some sort of designer-based God theisms, the reason I don't believe in those, I have an article on my blog called Bayesian Counter Apologetics. And I go through 10 common arguments for God, and I show how all the arguments that are used for God are based on leaving evidence out. When you leave evidence out, the argument sort of looks like it works. But when you put evidence back in that they left out, the argument flips. The evidence starts to look the opposite of that. It starts to look like there isn't a God. And every single argument I look at, it either dissolves logically or it ends up like that. When you put the evidence back in, we end up with more evidence against this God that we're trying to defend than evidence for it. So I find it to be mostly just something that people are rationalizing belief in, rather than something that we've actually discovered as a fact of the world.
Okay. You know, I really want to start the discussion in a more classical theistic way, in the sense that the very fact that being is and there's something, I don't think the profundity of that in and of itself really is understood by a lot of people. Just the very fact that we are, and we are contingent, and so we have to look to one who holds essence and existence and identity, and from his very existence, he can't help but to be. So there is no is not in God. He is all is.
Yeah, to me, that's an even more astonishing claim than that anything exists at all. I mean, I don't think we can explain the existence of what we observe by positing something even more fabulous that we don't observe. I think everything that we do observe can be explained in other ways. And I don't think there's any presumption that nothing should exist versus something. We actually don't have any demonstrations available that there should be nothing rather than something, regardless of whether there's a God or not. So we can't actually get from that to the belief in some sort of supernatural person.
I would beg to differ. The very nature of reality tells us that being is, that we exist. And so when you follow that argument back, there must be something that grounds all existential reality. There's something must be absolute in order to ground all contingency. You can't have an infinite regress. So I'm talking about the bigger picture here.
Well, there's two things. First, you can have an infinite regress. There's no logical demonstration to the contrary of that. And secondly, even if there isn't, the ultimate ground of being does not have to be a sentient being. It can be just some sort of fundamental physical fact, some sort of like the nature of space-time, for example. It could just be space-time itself. Could be the nature of nothingness that inevitably emerges something from because of basic principles that there's no rules governing what nothing will or won't do. I mean, you can get to all sorts of fundamental grounds of being that don't have minds, which are an extremely complex thing to posit.
Sorry to jump in. We have first, let me get back to it. From none other than Steve McRae. He's wondering, let me see.
Hey,
posting a metaphysical necessity, but is it a mere bare possibility? Could be infinite regress, could be a chain ending in contingency, a brute fact, or metaphysical necessity. To say, let's say, why can't you have just an infinite regress?
Okay, I was hoping this would come up. There are two kinds of causal series that are possible. You have a causal series that we would call per accident, and that would be in the sense where I cause my son's being, and I can cease to be, and he can continue on in his causal power. So that's what we would call a per accidental causal chain. Also, for example, a train and its cars, you've got the locomotive. That would be a per accident causal chain. Now, there is nothing, as far as reason is concerned, that would say or demonstrate that that is not a possibility. But every per se causal chain must start, or every per accident causal chain must start in a per se. It has to start in something essential. It's like trying to borrow a library book. You can't have a bunch of instrumental causes that somehow come together and explain their own reality. So when we're talking about God, we're talking about one whose essence is to exist. And we find in creatures that what they are and that they are distinct. So we find the necessity of bringing together the composition of essence and existence needs to be answered, because if you posit space-time as the ultimate something, that is impotency. That is always changing, always moving. It is a composite. And so as Plato said, that which is unity must necessarily ground all multiplicity. So you have to have this per se, essentially existing mind, and we can get into all the other issues of causation.
Yeah, you've leapt right to mind suddenly for no. There's a huge gap in reasoning there, because you could just say if we have a past eternal model of the universe, since we're working in that paradigm right now, we don't actually know, so there's lots of different possibilities. But let's just assume we're looking at a past eternal universe. You can just have space-time with its properties past eternal. Those properties are eternal. Space-time itself can change shape and stuff like that, but the actual fundamental properties of space-time never change. And that's it. That explains everything. There's no further per se requirement.
No, that does not explain everything. It doesn't explain why it is.
Well,
you're not grasping
you can't explain why your God is either. It's the same.
No, we're saying that he is the absolute ground of all existential becoming.
I get to play the same game. I get to declare.
You
get to just arbitrarily declare something as a fundamental absolute reality. I'm declaring space-time is the absolute underlying reality.
It is qualitatively something different.
Prove me that space-time cannot be the absolute fundamental reality.
Well, because space-time, it changes,
but not the properties.
It's in potency.
Even God changes. He changes his mind. He thinks. He does things. Acts in history.
That's not classical theism.
Well, it's nevertheless a correct description of the God you're talking about. Unless you're talking about a God who never thinks, never makes a decision, and never changes.
No, I'm talking about classical theism. And Dennis Turner, in his inaugural address at Cambridge University.
You're not a Christian?
Yes, I'm a Christian.
Well, then how can God have become Jesus if he never changes?
We're in the realm of theology now.
No, we're talking about your belief
we could go to theology.
No. Let's talk about your belief system. You're defending a God that is not the God that you believe in. Why are you doing that?
No, this is classical theism. This is
no. We're talking about the God you believe in.
Judaism.
No, let's not.
That is the God I believe in.
The God you believe in changes. The God you believe in changes. Yes, he does. He became incarnate and ceased to become incarnate.
That is not a change. We're talking about there is no change within the essential nature of God. That is not a change.
Oh, well, then that's the same thing with space-time. Space-time changes in the same way. The essential nature of space-time stays eternally the same, and just the superficial properties can alter over time.
It's fluxing. It's changing. It is just becoming
like God becoming flesh and not becoming flesh.
That is not the same issue. That is not about the essence of the Godhead. No, it is not.
Neither are the properties of space-time. The essence of space-time are just the properties of space, not the shape of space-time, not within space-time or anything like that.
I don't think you're getting the profundity of what it is to exist, and that anything must have its ground.
That we can explain everything down to the fundamentals of space-time, and we need nothing else to explain why space-time exists any more than just saying it just exists. It's the fundamental.
I'm going to jump in real quick.
You are explaining what it is. You're not explaining that it is, and those two things are distinct.
I'm telling you that is the fundamental ground of all being. In one particular model, we can explain everything by proposing that the fundamental reality of space-time, not the shape of space-time, not the particular way space-time is arranged, the fundamental properties of space-time, what it is to be space-time in all times, all eternally, are always the same, and you need nothing else. Once you've got that, you have everything else. You can explain particles, you can explain universes, you can explain us. You don't need anything else.
Kenny, there's a little bit of confusion in the live chat about your.
Okay.
You keep you're often using the word essence, and just if
Right.
I can nail you down to what do you mean by that?
It's a good question.
Your
yeah.
definition of essence.
This is, classical theism, classical Thomism in the sense, but the essence of something is that which we give a definition to. So if we define what a lion is, or a giraffe, or a Apatosaurus, that which we're defining, we're saying that is the essence of that thing. Now, when we look at space-time, there is nothing about what it is that tells us that it should be. I don't think you're getting the idea that essence,
declare it the case.
that what a thing is and that a thing is are distinct. Even Kant talked about the fact that existence is not a predicate. It is not a part of the subject. It is not even something that you can predicate of things. It is something that is not a part of the essence of things.
Still doesn't get you to a mind. Doesn't get you to a mind. We can.
It does because you're
space time. We can just
no. It does because you're not understanding that this one who is simple, who is pure actuality, has all the perfections that we see within the created order. You have a serious problem with a mind coming out of absolutely space-time quantum fluctuations. A cause,
that's not where mind comes from.
An effect. What's that?
Were you just saying that we think minds just appear out of quantum fluctuations?
No, I'm saying that there's no ground for thinking and consciousness in that which is not thinking and not conscious.
Of course there is.
That is absolutely absurd.
We can build intelligent machines. Now let's set aside consciousness as a separate thing. We can create intelligent machines that are capable of acting intelligently, selecting between options. They're capable of perception, and all sorts of things. We can demonstrate that they are fundamentally reducible to physical parts that are individually not intelligent. So if we can get intelligence from non-intelligence, and we've demonstrated empirically that we can do this, there is therefore no argument left that we can't get consciousness from simply a greater complexity of intelligence. And in fact, leading theories of consciousness are about integrated information theory. Consciousness is actually an emergent property of highly complex intelligent systems. So if you can get intelligence from non-intelligence, you can get consciousness from non-consciousness. It's a fundamental fallacy. What do you call it? Fallacy of division or addition, whichever one of those it is. You can't say that because I'm made of atoms that therefore I can't be a person, right? So
no, but you're talking about the fallacy of composition.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got another live question from Shannon Q. Minds can affect.
Hey, Shannon.
Minds can affect and augment reality, but minds can also misperceive reality. How can that be accounted for?
I would simply say that mind that is incarnate, that mind that is within body, is subject to sense perception. We get our knowledge through our senses, and because of the nature of matter, see, that's why space-time can't ground all becoming. You have to have what is being in order to ground that which is becoming.
Space-time is being.
No, it is not. It's becoming.
If you exist,
it's becoming.
You logically necessarily exist at a location, and you logically necessarily exist at a time. Because otherwise, if you don't exist at any time, you don't exist. If you don't exist at any location, you don't exist. You exist nowhere, never. So the fundamental nature of being is space and time. It's being at a location at a time. That is the fundamental nature of being. You don't need anything else to be. If you are at a location and a time, you are. There's nothing else you need. You don't need magical gods or ghosts or supernatural powers or any special concoctions, no alchemy. If you have a place and a time and you're there, you exist. That's all there is. That is the fundamental ground of being, is there being a place to be.
Okay, space and time are those things that we predicate of substances. All of that is accidental. You must have a per se that grounds.
You don't know that.
Anything.
You don't know that space and time is accidental.
Yeah, you just described place Aristotle's 10 categories.
Where it is accidental, but that there is a place for them to be. You haven't demonstrated that that's accidental.
No, but what you're saying,
you're confusing what something is at a particular time and place, and that there is a time and place for them to be. Those are two different things.
You're talking about space-time, and we know that space-time had a beginning for this universe, and it is a something. Space-time is a something, and it must have a ground for that something. It is a what it is and a that it is.
The only thing we know it is a place to be. We actually have no evidence that space-time is anything else but that. Which is, there's nothing more fundamental than existing, nothing more fundamental than being. There's nothing that can be the essence of being other than being at a place and time.
I got a question for Richard.
Space-time is it. There's nothing else you need.
Sorry, guys.
That's accidental.
I'll be butting in. Oh, also, TJ.
Okay.
You got to help me monitor this live chat. It's blowing up. So I don't know how Steve McCrae does it on his own. So you got to jump in here, man. It's
okay. Steve's got Kyle. So Kyle's the brains behind Steve. So
shit. Listen, this is for Richard. It's from James Walker. He's the founder of the Atheist Christian Book Club that you were at last time you were through Dallas-Fort Worth. So
right.
He asks, is space and time eternal?
Well, this is what we were just talking about. We took a fork in the road at the beginning of this conversation. We don't know. It either is past eternal or it had a beginning. At this current time, we're talking about past eternal models. We haven't gone into the what would be the case if we had past finite models. But in the past eternal model, that's what we're talking about now. In past finite models, you just have the question of why would space-time evolve into something other than just a singular point, for instance. So if you would always have this eternal point of space-time, but if its inherent nature of that is, for example, there are no laws that exist governing what it will do, because that would be an accident, right, of some sort of contingent fact. If you start with just a singular point of space-time, fundamental essence of being is there is a place to be, there is something that is. Yeah. But no rules govern what's going to happen to that. Once you work out the math and logic of that, literally anything can happen as a result of that. And in fact, you can work out the infinite number of possibilities, and you can actually determine, like statistically, the vast majority of those possibilities are going to be multiple universes, some sort of universe. Since a single point remaining a single point is one possibility out of infinitely many other possibilities, the probability of that one point remaining that one point is actually infinity to one against. So we can be just from logic alone, just from that positive, presuming that there was this singular point of space-time as the fundamental ground of all being, it follows necessarily that there will almost certainly be not just this universe, but probably many others. Yeah. And we don't need anything else to get that inference.
With part of what my argument is here, is that there are different kinds of causal relations that are out there. And with the church in the Middle Ages, most of them held to an eternal universe model, a multi-universe model, if you will. The idea, though, is that there may not be a temporal beginning to the universe, although I do believe there is a temporal beginning to the universe. But what if there's not a temporal beginning of the universe? There still has to be an ontological grounding for that which is fundamentally changing, and that which is it's composite,
which is space-time. Space-time, as long as space-time exists and it exists past eternally, it can take any shape at any point along its length. You don't need anything else to explain why that exists or what it does. If it just exists, if it's a brute fact of what exists, then that explains everything else. You don't need a mind to explain why there would be space-time eternally. What
put space and time together? We know that parts
together, right?
Parts don't self-assemble.
No, it's not a symbol.
It's a simple argument for me.
Space and time is a composite.
No, it's a continuum.
It's a composite. Space and time.
You can't
is a composite.
No way. You can't chop up space-time until there's no space-time.
No.
You always
space and time are two distinct things. I'm not saying they're separate. I'm saying they're distinct. They're composite. parts must be put together by something that precedes them, and parts of space-time cannot be grounded in their parts.
What is space-time made out of then that is not space-time? If it's a
I don't understand why you're not getting that space/time are two things coming together.
That's
another live chat. Another
it's
live
a composite.
Chat.
No. That's just a question of the arrangement of things in space.
But see, I don't. That's what you're not getting.
No.
Things that are composed. They're parts that come together.
Except
unity must precede any multiplicity.
A composite means that you can break it down in fundamental parts, and the parts are not the same as the thing that it was. Otherwise, it's not a composite. If you can break something down, it always stays the same thing.
Infinite regress of particle recognition.
Exactly. So if you
say that, I didn't hear that.
Saying there is a way to infinite regress. Before you saying there wasn't a way to infinitely regress. Now you're saying there is.
No, you didn't.
Infinitely broke down smaller and smaller parts.
No, you didn't.
And
okay, let me clarify. No, I said, hold on. I said there are two causal relations that we speak of. That which is per accidens can be eternal, but it still needs a ground, a per se relationship. Okay. As I said, the universe could be eternal. It doesn't need a temporal start, but it needs an ontological start. It needs to be grounded. The other kind of infinite chain.
Well, we don't need a mind for this ground.
Yeah. I mean,
no.
You need a place for it to be.
No, what I'm
place for something to be. That's it. You don't need anything else.
Okay. I understand that I'm not at the place right now in the argument that I can demonstrate that a mind is behind everything.
Well, I should point out that none of these arguments, not a single one of them, has ever passed muster as logically valid deductive argument. We've none of these has ever gotten to a god.
That is an amazing assertion. That's not true.
There's no logically valid syllogism that gets a mind at the end from premises that we know are true.
It's part of a greater argument. It's part of an greater argument.
Never happened.
And it's grounded in the laws of identity and the law of non-contradiction.
You're that. There's no logical argument that gets there. That's what I'm telling you. It's never happened.
Let me jump in real quick.
Always come in and claim this, but they never.
Let me jump in real quick. TJ, this is just a one-on-one, man. So just keep it to just field the live questions. All right, help me do that. We got one coming in. Ontologically, it can be grounded in past eternal space-time as a brute fact.
No, brute facts don't get you anything. A bunch of contingencies do not all of a sudden add up to a necessary. It's nonsense. It's nonsense.
If it's past eternal, it's not a bunch of contingencies. It just exists.
Yes, it is. No, it's going through the sequence of time. Every part. It's actually becoming.
Maybe you don't know relativity theory. Actually, all time exists simultaneously. You know that, right? So, like, for example, photons, if you take a photon...
depends on if you're an A theorist or a B theorist, but sure.
Correct, but pretty much all physicists are B theorists today because Einstein's theory of relativity entails B theory. That's why you can have some things being simultaneous for one observer, but not simultaneous for another observer. That's not possible on A theory. And that's a fundamental fact of physics that our whole GPS system relies on. We use it to throw guided missiles at foreign nations. So we know for a fact that this reality of relativity is true, which means that B theory has to be true. There's no plausible way to explain how things can be simultaneous for one observer and not simultaneous for another without B theory. You certainly can't do it on A theory, because that means different times exist at different times, right? So we know for a fact that time is actually just something that we perceive from within time. But from outside of space-time, it's all static. It's all just one thing.
Again, reality is that which is changing. Heraclitus talked about it. He talked about everything is flux, everything is change. Parmenides talked about no, everything is being. Plato came along, Aristotle came along.
All that means is there are different things at different locations. But there's nothing that prevents that being the case once you have a place for things to be.
So you don't believe in change?
Change exists in the same way as in a comic strip or on the paintings on my wall. If I look from left to right, I don't need time to say that it changes, that the course of the things change across the painting, across the wall.
So the beginning of our discussion is not...
It doesn't require a theory. Change does not require a theory. That's
okay. Okay, but I'm asking you, you don't believe change exists?
Of course I believe change exists. I believe that change is explained by B theory of time.
Okay, but I'm not... I'm saying it needs to be explained ontologically. It needs to have a ground. Our universe,
physics has done this.
let me back up a little bit and start by saying this. Everything that is in the creaturely physical realm, those things are composed, whether it be matter, form, substance, accidents.
You got to get your words really carefully right here.
Sure.
Composed means that if you
who keeps on talking over us? I can't hardly hear.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
TJ, if you could just mute your mic when you're not using it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
That's what he
sounds like TJ wants to debate me.
Hasn't that happened already? I thought that might have already been a thing. But no, composed means that if you break something down, the individual parts will be different from the composed thing. The composite will be different from its parts. If you decompose something and all the parts are still the same as the thing that you had to begin with, it is not a composite. Right?
It has pieces.
Yeah, but that's not
everything. Bodies can be broken and divided.
The Thomist arguments and the phasor arguments.
Everything.
No. But see, it does. Once you change the definition of composite, you don't get the conclusion that you want. This is what happens with the equivocation fallacies. Is you build this logical argument.
This is not equivocation.
The term halfway through. No. So there's two different senses of composite, and I'm telling you that neither one will get you a mind. You don't get a mind at the end of a logical deductive syllogism. It's just not going to happen.
Okay. Again, I said that I'm working my way to that. It has to go from deduction from what is the nature of reality. Right now, we're talking about just that something is, that being is.
Sure.
There's being and becoming. Becoming is composite. It's particular. Multiplicity is in need of composite. Our bodies are in need of unifying. There must be a unifying principle to all multiplicity.
Sure.
Even as Dawkins once said, he said he thinks that God is complex. No, God is simple. His essence is to be.
That's actually.
But everything else is composed of what it is, and it is.
It's impossible to have a non-complex mind. A mind is by definition complex. That is actually what distinguishes a mind from a non-mind, is its specified complexity. If you take away its specified complexity, you have a vegetable, not a mind.
Okay, now this is something that's very, very important. You see, today we find atheists talking about a God that not even Christians believe in. The kind of God that would be complex or changing is not theism. He has a mind, but again...
What does that mean then? What's the difference between God's mind and a rock?
Okay, there's a very important...
Describe the cognitive content of God that is different from the cognitive content of a rock.
There is something that is very important that I think is missed in these discussions too, and that is how we talk about God anyway. There is no univocal connection between creaturely existence and infinite, the ground of being, as is called ipsum esse subsistent. God is being itself subsisting. He necessarily is not subject to definition in a univocal manner with our words. So when we say mind for human beings, I'm not saying there's a one-to-one correlation with God's mind, but there is an analogical way that his mind, he can have thoughts, but he is far beyond reality.
Like the word has to mean something, or else you can't assert that it's true. You can't prove or know that something is true if you don't even know what it means.
Analogical predication is...
What is the difference between God's mind and a rock? Like, so a rock has no beliefs, no knowledge, right? So what's the difference between that and God?
That is a
knowledge.
It's an irrelevant question to what we're even talking about.
You're not talking. You're talking about a nothingness. You're talking about some sort of
I'm talking about pure existence. Pure existence.
We got a question.
He who is.
Chat. We have a question from the live chat from Tom Horrigan. The question is there actual order in the universe? I think he was asking both of you. How do you define order in the universe? No need to look to the stars within 5 feet where each of us sits. Is there actual order in the universe? And then we'll get back to whether there's a difference between God's mind and a rock. Is there order in the universe?
I would imagine Kenny's answers is obvious, but go ahead, Kenny.
Is there order in the universe? Certainly, but we're losing order all the time. That's what entropy is all about.
That would be my answer as well.
Okay. Yeah.
See, the theologian does like science. I do read a lot.
Well, let me throw in my personal flavor. In a closed system, compared to an open system, is there a difference in the way entropy behaves? Like we have a sun feeding us. Is it possible that in that type of system that entropy would be decreased?
Is that for me?
Yes. Well, I'm just fucking out of the side of my neck, just as a
of course. An open system is subject to input from outside that system. Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
All right. Back to God's mind and a rock. Sorry.
No, we're trying to get at what you're even claiming exists. So far, you've defined it as nothing. You've given no definition. No.
Okay, let me give you a definition.
Let's just do knowledge. We'll stick with that one thing. Does God have knowledge?
Everything that we talk about with God is essential and not accidental. He doesn't have knowledge. He is knowledge.
Same thing. You could say
no, it's not the same thing.
My brain does not have knowledge. My brain is knowledge.
We're not talking about corporeal parts here.
No, but the structure, which can be manifest in any corporeal parts. The structure is the same, no matter what parts it's made out of.
We're not even talking about an embodied mind.
Yes, but the only way that you can have knowledge is to be able to have true beliefs and not false beliefs, right? So you have so there has to be a discriminating feature. So there has to be structure. So
you're talking within the creaturely realm. That's what I'm trying to tell you is that the creaturely realm is dependent. It changes.
God either knows I'm in Columbus or he doesn't know I'm in Columbus.
Of course he does. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So how does he know I'm in Columbus? He's got to have structure because there's different ways that you can tie Richard Carrier to all the locations it's possible to be. All of them are wrong except one. So we have extremely high complex knowledge here, information, very specified complexity that's tying just me to Columbus. Where does that structure come from?
It is not a compound within the mind of God. It is one intuitive act of knowing that encompasses all that is.
But that's still
eternity in one. No, there is no structure.
God, highly complex, because that's just one thing. Richard Carrier and Columbus. Now we get all the other things to know. The incredible complexity of this knowledge base, this database you're talking about, this relational database of information is vastly complex. Where does that come from? How does God get that?
Again, if you read a book by David Brentley Hart, one of his laments is that, and I tried to allude to it a little bit earlier with Denny's Turner and his inaugural address at Cambridge, is that most atheists today don't know what they're denying because they think that they can talk about the God in the Bible. Hold on. They think that they can talk about the God of the Bible in the same way they talk about Zeus. We're talking about qualitatively a different level of isness. So there is no comparison. So what most atheists say they disbelieve in a God today, I would agree with them because they haven't come close to even understanding the classical idea of God. We're talking about one who is essential. Everything to him is essential. There's no accidents. There's no composition. His to be is what he is. He is a simple act of being that gives the answer and grounds all existential becoming.
Why does that have knowledge? What you just described, there's no reference to knowledge or any kind of structure like that.
He is knowledge.
A mindless ground of being.
You're trying to put it in creaturely terms and trying to describe the infinite by the finite.
I'm asking you, how do you get from this to that? In other words, you've got this fundamental ground of being, this isness, etc. Okay. How do you get out of that? How do you get logically from that to the conclusion that it itself includes all knowledge?
Okay, so you're wanting to know how we predicate things of God and things like that.
How is it a God and not just a force? Like, what's the difference?
Kenny,
okay.
The consensus in the live
let me
chat,
do that.
The consensus in the live chat right now, granted, it's 90+% non-believers. I give you that. But the consensus in the live chat is that everything you're saying only gets us to a deism. So how do you?
I don't think it even gets that far. We haven't even gotten, we haven't gotten beyond the Force and the Jedi Knights and stuff.
Okay, let's do that, and I'll try to do that real quick. Yeah. We are talking about one who is pure actuality. The idea of essence and existence is the same thing as act and potency. God has no potential. He is fully actualized. God has no becoming. He is all being. And so when we look at the fact that pure actuality, by very definition, has all creaturely perfections in a most absolute and perfect way. Why would I make that jump? Because you can see within the creative order that there are minds, there are these qualities, these predicates that we speak of, and so they must come from something. It's called the principle of proportionate causality.
We know they come from things that aren't themselves. We know mind comes from a complex arrangement of things that causally interact. The things themselves are not minds. Minds do not exist without that arrangement of things. That's what we empirically observe. We know this.
Let me continue on and get from mere Plato's demiurgos and get to a ground of being. Number one, Plato distinguished between a demiurge and the one. And I'm talking about the one. I'm talking about the unity that grounds all multiplicity, answering the ancient issue of the problem of the one and the many. Could maybe somebody block the middle guy's camera? He's trying to mock me as I'm talking, and I don't appreciate it.
Sorry, I was muted. I suck at multitasking.
Anyway, it's hard to concentrate when I got somebody mocking me in the camera.
I just ignore him because that's a small little thing down at the bottom. I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah. Well, it's eye level for me. So
yeah, I'm still not seeing how you get from this isness and all this stuff to knowledge.
Okay, I would be more than happy to walk through that with you, man.
We know minds are contingent entities. We know there's no mind has been observed to exist that isn't a composite of more fundamental things that aren't themselves minds. So I don't see how you get a mind out of this fundamental ground of being.
You're talking about a brain at that point, right?
Well, it doesn't matter what
you're trying to do.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what it's made out of. It still has to emerge from something. It has to be structured out of things.
Exactly. All creaturely minds must come out of something. But what I'm saying is, for that multiplicity,
all minds have to be structured. So that structure has to come from somewhere. It doesn't matter what the structure is made out of.
No, I totally agree. It has to be put together by a something.
How you're getting a mind for this fundamental ground of being, which precedes all contingencies, such as the formulation of minds.
Well, because
you have a mind already.
Because you can't give what you don't have. Which
we know that's
causes.
That's not true.
No, No, that absolutely is true. You cannot give what you don't have. You can't give being if you don't have it.
No, well, that's all you need is being. You don't need mind. So you're confusing being with mind. I'm talking about yes, you need being to have mind, but you also need being to have a rock. Rocks and minds. But minds require much more complexity and organization to get to the mind. But all the parts, you can take all the parts away and the mind will cease to exist, and none of the parts will have a mind. Minds are emergent from complex emergent properties of more fundamental things that are themselves not minds. And that's one of the most fundamental things we've thoroughly demonstrated scientifically. So for you to propose that
I have no problem with that.
That somehow precedes all of this doesn't make sense. I don't see how you're getting from the fundamental ground of being, which precedes minds, and giving that fundamental ground a mind. It's not because this fundamental ground. Well, let me answer it. This fundamental ground of being is pure act. There is no potentialities. He has all of the creaturely attributes in their perfect absolute sense. That doesn't follow at all. I mean, if everything is made of atoms, it doesn't follow that every atom has every single property.
No, but
complex properties emerge from simpler properties. So if you break things down, you get simpler, simpler, simpler. You get down to space-time, very fundamental laws of physics. And you don't just suddenly leap up to the most complex thing in the possibly conceivable, which is this massively amazing mind you're talking about. You get simpler and simpler. You don't get more and more complex. Complexity is an arrangement of things.
That has been my argument all along. Everything must start in that which is simple. God is simple.
Cannot have a mind. That's what I'm telling you.
But creaturely, you're talking within the realm of the created order. We're talking about the one who grounds the created order.
If your God doesn't have a mind, your God is no different from a rock. Your God is just it's just some force. It's a mindless force. And then all you have now is
you're not understanding that this pure actuality, this being who is simple, has all of those things essentially and not in a complex way.
I'm asking you how you get that freaking conclusion, because it doesn't follow logically from what you're saying.
It follows.
We know that minds require complexity. You cannot. It's logically impossible to have a simplicity that also is a mind. It's a direct contradiction.
Well, I'm sorry you can't get it, but that has been classic theism for 3,500 years.
When my hand is in the air, there's a live chat.
Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, all of these men, all the way up to Anselm, Aquinas, they all spoke of God in this way. See, we're in the realm of theology, and I understand that you don't get it, but
yes, mainstream philosophy has been showing these things false for just as many thousands of years.
No, it hasn't. All of the great philosophers have been theists.
A.J. Ayer.
Let me jump in real quick.
I'm talking about historically speaking.
David Hume?
I'm talking about historically speaking, those that started the discipline of philosophy were theists.
Most obsolete and ignorant people.
Let me jump in, guys. Sorry. Sometimes I would agree with Kenny that the vast majority were theists, but that was in spite of, not because of. But here is
it's changed now that we have modern philosophy.
Definitely.
You can look at
97% of the National Academy.
We moderns are just.
Okay, this is from the live chat from Bubba Tao. I haven't had a chance to dissect this proposition, but both of your takes on this. Proposition 1, everything that is sentient is contingent upon its constituent elements, processes, and circumstances. Proposition 2, a God is a sentient being. Conclusion is, therefore, any God is contingent. You want me to read that again, or you got it?
It sounds like gobbledygook to me, because you're trying to speak in a univocal manner about the ground of existence.
Which
you can't do that.
Gobbledygook to me, actually. No, I understand.
It's in all the Thomist writing. It's in all the Aristotelian writings.
It doesn't. You can assert that someone believed in Atlantis. You can assert that someone claimed this, and you can assert someone claimed that. That doesn't make it true. What we're trying to explain to you is that minds are complex. Minds have to be a composite. You cannot have a mind without it being a composite.
Not one who is pure act. and it's simple.
No, that's logically false. It's logically
it follows that this one who is pure act has all creaturely perfections in an absolute way.
Not only does that not follow by any logical deduction that there is, it's logically impossible. It is a logical contradiction to say that the complex structure of a mind can exist without complex structure. That's like saying it exists and doesn't exist at the same time. It's a contradiction.
No, it's actually not. If I say that a simple being has a mind essentially,
I don't think you understand what a mind is, what I'm talking about. Minds
no, I certainly understand.
The only thing that separates my mind structurally from a rock is structure, which is inherently complex. Without that complex difference, there would be no difference between my mind and a rock. A rock would I would be dumb like a rock. I would have no thoughts, no knowledge.
In the live
what
chat,
we're saying is God's mind is not particular. It's not divided. It can't be divided.
I don't care if it's, I'm telling you, I don't care if it's elastic and you can't break it up and it's invulnerable to hammers. It doesn't matter. It has structure. It has complex. It has to be complex.
You're talking about the creaturely realms.
This one might be
specified complexity. There's no way to have a mind without complexity. It's a logical contradiction. It's just not possible. It's impossible.
You're not getting what divine simplicity is all about.
You're not getting.
Jim, you have your hand up.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I do understand.
Minds have structure, and that's what makes minds distinctly minds as opposed to non-minds. That is literally the fundamental essence of a mind compared to a non-mind is its structure.
Okay, you're talking in the creaturely realms here.
No, I'm talking about knowledge, the ability to know the difference between where
you're trying to describe human knowing and then applying that to God in a univocal manner. You can't do that.
I'm talking about any form of mind. It doesn't matter.
No, the divine mind is not.
There's no difference between God and a rock. Then we're fine. But if you're going to say that mind has any kind of discriminating ability, that it knows the difference between me being in Columbus and me being in LA or me being on Jupiter, that it can actually discriminate between those two possibilities, that entails structure. You can look at that.
He knows it in one intuitive act from all eternity.
It doesn't matter how he knows it. It still requires there to be structure for him to be able to know it, as opposed to knowing something else that's wrong or not knowing anything at all. The only thing that separates it between knowing and not knowing is this ability to discriminate between true and false.
God doesn't have an
complex ability to discriminate between true and false. You have to have structure.
He doesn't have God doesn't have an agent intellect like human knowing. You can't. You're trying to apply something that doesn't fit. I'm sorry, Jim. I'm sorry. I want to give you respect.
No, you both of you are getting now. You should feel really good about this, Kenny. But like I said, it's mostly non-believers on here, but they are really liking how you are approaching this and with intellectual honesty. And you're both getting some rave reviews right now. This is a recurring theme in the live chat right now, but this comes from David McInnes. For Kenny, this should be pretty easy for you. How do you get from a mind may exist to being an actual God? And then how can you determine a specific God out of that?
I think I know. I might need to have you repeat that question.
Well, it brings us to deism kind of question. There's still a lot of ambiguity here. How do we get to Yahweh of the Old Testament from here?
Okay. Yeah.
God.
Yeah. I've been trying to walk through that issue because
let's transition to that. Let's hear that part, because we've only got about half an hour, maybe an hour left.
Yeah. So I was thinking we were almost ready to wrap it up here, but
I'm willing to go another half hour, maybe a little more than that if you want. But I would like to handle that side of it, right? Like we've been focusing a lot on the fundamental theism thing, but yeah, that's an important question: is how do you get from that? Even let's say we grant that your conclusion, right? Let's do that for the sake of argument.
Sure.
And then say, if that's the case, how do we get from there to Yahweh and Jesus, I guess, would be the argument or the question.
So the banana is working? Is that what you said?
For the sake of argument, bananas were not cultivated by humans to be useful. But okay, yeah. Go on.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate dialoguing with you, Dr. Carrier. I have the utmost respect for you. And I hope you don't
want to try and understand, right? Like this is
sure.
I get exasperated, but it's because I'm trying to understand why certain positions are held or not understood and so on. But anyway, that's
Sure. Yeah.
why I get animated. But anyway, I do
No,
want to hear this part.
I get passionate too. So, but I hope you don't, interpret passion for disrespect or anything like that.
Not at all. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When we go to, the, let me try to put it all together in a very succinct manner. When we're talking about, and this is an a posteriori argument for God. We know the ontological argument doesn't work, mainly because existence is not a predicate. But when we look at being, or individual existence, those individual existence are composed of what they are and that they are. So their essence does not carry with it the idea that they must be. And that was my point with space-time. There's nothing within the very nature of space-time that tells us that it should be. When a theologian talks about God and we talk about God existing, we're talking about what is called something that is self-evident in a per se notum manner, which means it's self-evident in itself, but may not be plainly self-evident to those immediately. But when a theologian is talking about God, we're talking about one who, when we say God is, that is collapsible. The subject and predicate are collapsible, which means it becomes self-evident in itself that the definition of God is isness, to be-ness, the very ground of what it means to be. And so God and to be is exactly what we're talking about in that self-evident in itself, but not self-evident to those who don't understand that God is actually that. So ontological argument doesn't work because we don't have immediate access to the essence of God. So when we're talking about those things and we talk about the identity of his essence and existence and that he is to be, and we talk about the fact that he is pure actuality, essence and existence are identical, act, potency, he is absolute potency, pure act, as Aristotle spoke about. And so when God revealed himself to Moses, very interesting, because he said, Yah, I am. The Septuagint translates it, ego eimi oon, I am the existent one. I am the I am. I am who I am, the law of identity. I am who I am. And so when we talk about Yahweh, that's what the name means. It means the very ground of being. So this idea is in Scripture. So when we talk about the one who's the ground of being, and we look and see if that one who is the ground of being has actually sought to communicate with human beings, we find that Scripture is unlike any other holy book. Although all the main monotheistic religions are ontologically speaking about the same God. Muslims are speaking about the same God ontologically. Theologically, there's a difference. Judaism, even Hinduism, even though they have these 300 million gods, they still have a God who is this being himself, consciousness himself, joy, bliss himself. So when we look at all that, we find scripturally there is a lining up with this idea of God being the very ground of being. Even Jesus himself said, before Abraham was, ego eimi, I am. Now, when we look at this simplicity, this pure actuality, and we ask what flows from that, what can we deduce from that? Well, we can deduce from that that God must be one. He must be a unity. There can't be two of these very grounds of being, because when we ask who this God is, if something is different, there must be, genus and species, and then difference. There must be a difference in order to be a different being. For multiplicity to come about, there must be a difference. So there can only be one. God can only be one. This ground of being can't be a multiplicity. He is of himself. He doesn't look to any other, which is the attribute of aseity. He's necessary. This is flowing from simplicity and pure actuality. It also informs us that he's eternal, because when we look at being itself, being is a qualitative thing, not a quantitative thing. Being can be participated in an infinite amount of ways without exhausting being itself. So there is a unity and diversity within all of the created order. To beiness, my to beiness is identical as a rock. Our to beiness is the same. It's the difference in the kind of beings that we are that make us different. But when you look at the whole aspect of what being actually is, it can be participated in an infinite way. It's not limited. It is qualitatively infinite. We're not talking, when we talk about God, we're not talking about quantitative infinites. We're talking about qualitative infinites. And so eternity comes, he's non-temporal. And then because he's pure act, he can't be a body. He can't be embodied. Because he's simple, he can't change, so he's immutable. Because he can't change and have potency of being at this place and that place, it means that he's infinite. And so he's not material, he's infinite. He must, because he has the pure actuality, he must have all the power, because he can't lack any potency. And so you just walk all the way through it, and the God of the Bible is coming right out. So the God of the philosophers is the God of Christianity. And we can get into, the whole thing of Jesus becoming a man and things like that.
So my first question would be, getting to the Yahweh thing is this the God you're talking about? That God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai and gave him the 613 commandments that dictated. Right. So how do you get that? How do you get that being the case, that your God happens to be that one, and it's not the Muslims who are right, or
I'll try to remember that.
Or...
Let me jump in. This is another one from Steve McRae. It's for Kenny. I did not know what the word.
Steve.
I did not know what's that word. I did not. Oh, aseity. So I understand it now. I've never heard that word before. Okay, so this question is kind of. It's deep for me, but I posted it into the side chat there for both of you to look at as I'm reading it.
It's a bit tricky, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So if God is actuality and divinely simple with aseity, how does God have intentionality? How is he more than modalities then? What is possible? What is necessity, etc.? So it's there in your side chat. Both of you can see it.
Yeah.
That is a good question, and I don't think I could answer that right off the top of my head. I'd have to look into that a little more and see exactly, what is, defining terms and issues like that. But I would say one thing, and this may not be anything of what the question entails, but I don't so much buy the whole idea of analytic philosophy and modal things, and talk about, possible worlds and things like that, like William Lane Craig talks about. I just don't talk about things in terms of that, possibility and necessity of whether or not God is necessary and in all conceivable worlds. I think it gets things backwards. So my understanding and my position is that essences have to communicate what can actually be, because it's the essence that instantiate, or being, that essence is instantiated and comes to be through an act of being. And in the real world, that's what it is. And so any kind of talk of me being a different person in a different world, gets things backwards, because you end up being not yourself, and you're denying the principle of identity. So that may have nothing to do with what he asked, but
I'm not going to let you off the hook, though. Before I ask the question, Richard he was on about the 613 commandments.
The 613 commandments.
I want to hear that answer.
How do you know that came from this God?
That has to do with, when I, as a Christian, my system, I try the best that I can. I want to be rational. I don't want to insult people's intelligence by, saying particular things like a lot of people do out there, Christians and stuff. So when I build my case for God and the God of the Bible, that is going to be a long case that I'm building. But to put it as succinctly as I can, if God exists, he must be this one that I'm talking about. So his self-revelation must inform me in a manner. For example, when we look at Scripture, it talks about time have a beginning, space, matter, energy, all this stuff having a beginning. So it
doesn't actually.
It does.
No, the language of Genesis 1, actually, there's stuff already present. It doesn't talk about the beginning of time, and it doesn't say that there wasn't stuff that God was already meddling with.
Well, we can talk about whether or not that's an independent clause or if it's a dependent clause, and whether or not bara, what that entails. But I'm talking about the New Testament. We're looking at Titus 1:3, that God put in effect the gospel before the beginning of time, pro chronos aeonios, before times eternal. Also in 1 Timothy 1:9.
That's actually a logical contradiction. You can't exist at a location before the beginning of time.
See, but here's the thing. For a theist, God is transcendent. He's not a part of this created order.
He still can't exist at a location of time that doesn't exist. If time begins at time X, there cannot be a time before that at which something can exist.
Hold on. I'll answer that for you, and I'll have to quote one of my heroes, which is Dr. Hugh Ross. He talks about the Big Bang being the beginning of time, space, matter, and energy, and we know from relativity that time had a beginning.
That's no longer the case, but that's old science.
The
Hawking-Penrose theorem was rejected by both Hawking and Penrose, so we no longer have any evidence that time began.
Okay, I get what you're saying there. Jeff Zwirink has a book coming out real soon called Escaping the Beginning. He deals with a lot of that stuff. But, when you're talking about 10 to the minus 42 seconds after t equals 0,
we actually don't know that's t equals 0. That's the problem, is that there could be a whole previous timeline.
Right. Okay, I'm getting all.
That's
I get all that stuff.
In a side thing about that. I want to get back to the 613 commandments. How do you?
No, I'm trying to build the case. I'll go faster.
Okay.
I'll go faster.
Sorry, I'm just not finding it, but yeah.
Okay, so this universe, whether or not time had a beginning, or if it began at that 10 to the minus 42 seconds, that plane.
We'll grant that.
Okay. So if time had a beginning, and that which brought the universe into existence has to be beyond time, space, matter, and energy. He must transcend that stuff. And even within the scientific language, this causal agent is spoken of as a transcendent causal agent. To the cause of the universe has to transcend it, be beyond it. So if God is beyond time, that means that he must have the capacity to do cause and effect in another dimension of time. So it would suggest to us, the Big Bang would suggest to us that there are other dimensions of space or other dimensions of time, and we'll speak of it, as God has access to those. And if he lives on 2 dimensions of time, he will never have a beginning, never have an end, and he can bring this universe into existence. So when you have Scripture talking in that way, and telling us things about the future, where God can see the future, and he tells the prophets, and ultimately Jesus Christ's resurrection from the dead is the crowning proof that all of that deposit of revelation is from this God who was the very ground of being. So there are other steps in the middle, of course, but that's basically where I go. I start with the existence of God, go all the way down to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and
okay, so here's
I don't
question.
even. One quick thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, one quick thing, and that is without the assumption that the Bible's the Word of God. I just start off as the Bible is just a reliable telling of the way things are, and it tells me that Jesus rose from the grave, and then Jesus authenticates the rest of Scripture for me to believe. And then also you have predictive prophecy that I think is a good reason to believe that the one who is outside of time, the one that transcends all things, can see down the corridors of time as well and tell us what's going to happen. So sorry to be so long-winded.
No,
go ahead.
That's you needed that.
I was doing my best. Doing my best.
Actually, you did pretty well at like articulating the general outlines of where you're getting at. Obviously, the resurrection thing, that's a whole other episode.
Yeah, I understand you don't believe in that. I understand you don't believe in that. Is that true? That is something like that?
This is actually one of my areas of expertise. I have a PhD in ancient history, so I've specialized in resurrection apologetics quite a lot. So that's something we can maybe do some other time.
That's really not my field, but I would have to have a little bit of time to look into it before I would feel comfortable, exchanging sabers with you.
Sure. And then the other thing is like fulfilled prophecy. That's highly disputable, but that's a whole other episode. Again.
Episode 2.
Right. I want to get to... So we have human beings we know are around for thousands of years, no revelation. Then suddenly this one tribe in the middle of nowhere gets the universal revelation from this universal timeless God. Why did he wait tens of thousands of years? Why did he only give the revelation to this one group in this one place rather than to everybody from the beginning of human civilization? So why wasn't this revelation from 40,000 years ago everywhere? Why is it only 40,000 years late, this one group? And then why did he completely change his mind, get rid of it, and replace it with a completely different scheme of salvation 2,000 years later?
It seems like you're quoting the great Christopher Hitchens. I've heard him say that before. I think
a lot of us have. I don't think even he would claim authorship of that idea. But that is the question, though. So how do you answer that? What is?
I would say that God has continually revealed himself throughout the history of man. Just because it wasn't inscripturated doesn't mean that God didn't reveal himself. So a part of what Scripture says, and a part of what I believe that reason can tell us, natural theology. And I think if we look at ancient cultures, many ancient cultures have the idea of the Creator God back in their distant memory.
But they don't have the 613 commandments. Why? I don't understand why the God who always exists and is perfect can't give the same consistent revelation to everybody from the start. Why does he let humans bandy about for tens of thousands of years before telling anyone about it, and then only tell one tiny group about it and not mention it to anybody else?
Well, what I'm saying is he is mentioning it to everybody else.
The 613 commandments?
No.
This is very specific.
Okay.
Okay.
This 613. Right? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Like we're talking the commandments that involve how to process slaves, murdering apostates, killing homosexuals, banning bacon, Like all of these things.
Don't forget
you're
shrimp.
Claiming, sure.
Don't forget shrimp.
Yeah, shrimp.
Yeah.
But you're claiming all these things come
Tattoos.
from a perfect, timeless being. I just don't see the logic there. I don't see how you get from one to the other.
Well,
That's
again,
the key.
it has.
That's the big question right there, isn't it?
I mean, it looks like random primitive barbarism.
Okay,
I
get
it doesn't look like wisdom of the greatest, most perfect being.
Okay,
I don't like
I get the power of that.
When
Yeah.
Moses ran down Mount Sinai with those tablets, nothing etched on those tablets were not already known. Yes?
Depends on what you
would.
mean. Yeah.
I would agree that those things are intuitive in mankind. Yeah.
Societies would not have formed without that knowledge.
Didn't he have 15 and then drop the one or something like that?
Mel Brooks.
Yeah,
That's a great movie.
It is true, though, that,
these 15 10 commandments.
Right. It is true that they were not 10. They were not 10 commandments.
That's funny.
A lot more than that. But no, I don't see how a ban on eating shrimp is some sort of eternal truth that
Sure.
all other cultures knew about.
Yeah. Well, let me answer that very quickly, and not to be long-winded like I was with the other question. And I was trying to give you more backgrounding with that. But the Old Testament revelation, okay, there was no inscripturated revelation of God until the prophets and Moses, of course, and Abraham. The whole design of the Old Testament is in order to bring about the Messiah. The ancient prophecy was this: at the fall.
Why not just have a Messiah? I don't understand why you need all of this background scheming with all these barbarous commandments. Why you have to wait tens of thousands of years even to come up with the schemes, which are weird and unnecessary, and then wait thousands more years to come up with the Messiah. Like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense for a timeless, eternal, perfect being. I'm seeing a disconnect here. I don't see them connecting.
I see what you're saying. The idea is that in order to bring about the Messiah, which is the culmination of all history, Jesus Christ, him coming and his resurrection from the dead for the salvation of all mankind, humankind, that's the culmination of history. So I do believe God spoke prior to that through creation and directly to people who would look at the created order and say, I don't know your name, but I know this didn't come from nothing. The God of creation, I trust you. That people could have been saved, without the Old Testament prior to that. Now, with the Old Testament, we're talking about the fact that he called one man to become a nation in order to bring about the Messiah. So the Old Testament is mainly the instructions for a theocratic kingdom, and it had to do with just the preservation of that nation amongst the other nations. So that divine revelation was not some profound thing. It was just simply the laws of society, the laws of their religion.
To say that the most perfect timeless being has commanded that you should kill homosexuals, that's kind of a really big statement. As opposed to saying that was just some barbaric thing that they thought back then and that they falsely attributed to this God. But you believe it actually came from this God.
Absolutely. But I think the purpose of it has to be understood in light of those things that we all have issues with. It's about the governing of a nation. And once that nation came about,
it's barbarism. It's not a well-ordered, just government. I mean, those commandments, most of them are pretty primitive, savage, and horrible. They
reflect much of what was already known in that day, the ancient Near East. I do understand that.
Read Hector Avalos, there were better cultures around that didn't adhere to these, some of the worst of these commandments. But anyway, better systems of slavery and so on. And also, of course, eventually we figured out maybe slavery is a bad idea, but that's, maybe God could have given us that memo 40,000 years ago instead of lately. So you've seen Star Trek V, the movie? I mean, I know that's pretty old.
I've seen all of those. I do love Star Trek. quite a bit. I am a big Star Wars fan too.
Yeah, well,
right, Jim. Jim trained Kylo Ren, so it's pretty cool.
So, side note, Kenny's online persona is Kylo Ken.
I noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he kind of freaked out a little when I told him that.
Look at the back there.
I see that. Yeah.
Adam Driver, who plays Kylo Ren, I was actually his martial arts instructor for 3 months in San Diego.
That's cool.
So he freaked out a little bit.
Yeah. Jim's kind of a hero to me now. Plus, I know not to mess with him either.
hey, listen. The very important question in the live chat. Steve McCrae, this is the last one you get, brother, because I got to go to other people. But
hey, Steve,
is pineapple on pizza? Is that a mortal sin or is that acceptable?
Pineapple on pizza has got to be it's got to be an abomination
unto the Lord.
Yes,
that's one of the 613.
I mean,
it's
definitely.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, cheese and pepperoni is literally an abomination. It's against one of the 613 commandments. But no, in Star Trek V, there's this guy who's claiming to be God, and he tries to convince Kirk and the Enterprise to take him because he needs the Enterprise to go somewhere. And then
is that Star Trek Nemesis? Is that
no? It's I don't remember the name of it, but yeah. Oh, actually, I'm not sure. But anyway. And Kirk says, like, what need does God have of a starship? I mean, he's freaking God, right? That was his clue that this guy's a fraud.
Right.
But to me, when you're looking at if God wants to bring about results, he doesn't need to work around this extremely inefficient, brutal, thousands-year-long process in just one place. He can literally, like 40,000 years ago, the moment people are starting to create villages, to all of them, give them, hey, these are the instructions you need to formulate a good society, and those instructions will actually be the kinds of instructions that will formulate a good society. So they will not have the arbitrary death penalty. They'll not have prohibitions on homosexuality. They won't have they'll be prohibiting slavery rather than codifying it and things like this. But it would be in all villages all over the earth, and all cultures would know it and if anybody forgets it, he would just reveal it to them again. You'd have this consistent revelation across all the earth, thousands of miles apart. We would historically be able to corroborate this by now. And we would have had really good sound instructions from the beginning. We wouldn't have gone through this long, barbarous, thousands-year-long process. It wouldn't have been just one tribe in the hills of Judea. It would have been the Chinese would have gotten it and so on. And we wouldn't need this really long, elaborate process for a Messiah. Whatever God needed to do to fix, he could just do it. He's freaking God. So I don't understand how you get this sort of haphazard, imperfect, extremely long, elaborate process. That looks like a long history of human folly. It does not look like the designs and active plans of a timeless, perfect being. And that's why I don't understand how you get from one to the other. It looks like a contradiction to me.
I certainly get the weight of that, that statement. Just to be a little transparent, there is no other issue that vexes me personally than the issue of suffering and evil in this world, and kind of what you explained, this haphazard kind of thing of dealing with creation. God, you're God, you could certainly intervene and even turn,
I'm not talking about intervention. I'm talking about just the revelation itself.
Oh, you're talking about the plan.
Fundamental plan. Well, it should have started 40,000 years ago or more. It should have been consistent everywhere. It should have happened immediately. It shouldn't require this long, elaborate process that requires all of these horrible commandments that are actually leading to the opposite of a good society.
Again, there is a purpose in all that God does, and sometimes, that to me is the issue where, trust in what as far as God. For me, I know he's there. I know he's good, all of these things. And so these things that I don't understand, those are the issues where the same way I can trust my wife. I know that, if she's going out somewhere, she's not going to cheat on me because I know her character. And even if she does something that I don't understand, I know that it's ultimately for my good. And so when we look at the way the history of the world has gone, there is something within Christian theology that answers the problem of evil and suffering, and that is the idea of soul-making theodicy. Irenaeus was one that wrote about this. John is another one that wrote about the fact that God has a plan to perfect beings like us by allowing that struggle against what you would call this haphazard plan, this chaos.
It's I mean, these are commandments coming from him. So he is the sower of chaos, like the deliberate creator of misery and death.
Again, Christian theology would say he's not the source of this.
He's literally telling people to kill each other for trivial reasons. He's literally telling people to enslave each other. He's literally telling people to treat outsiders differently from insiders, because Israelites, it's only indentured slavery. It lasts 7 years. Outsiders are chattel slavery. They get to be inherited from family to family. I mean, this is barbarism, and I don't understand how you can believe. Well, let me see if I can understand it though. It's the prophecy thing and the resurrection thing.
Yeah.
Those things convince you that this is the right one, and then you just trust that there must be an explanation for everything else. Is that?
No, I think reason informs me of a lot of things along with Scripture. But as a believer, I'm going to speak from my worldview at this point. As a believer, when I come to know Jesus Christ, there is the giving of His Spirit and the regeneration of my own spirit, where He is in direct communication with the individual. I call it the epistemological link. The Holy Spirit gives us the mind of Christ. And when we read the words of Scripture, there is, in that sense, a very real self-authenticating aspect of Scripture for a Christian. It's like a light. Light, when you turn on a flashlight, it self-authenticates. It brightens everything because it is brightness. That
would be great if everyone had that same experience.
All Christians do.
No. Actually, even non-Christians have that experience, and different sectarian Christians have that experience, and they all are absolutely certain that this religious experience confirms their version and understanding of the religion, and they're all contradict each other. And then
I get what you're saying there. I get what you're saying there.
I was a Taoist. I've had exactly what you're talking about. I felt
Kenny. I'm going to try to fit in 2 more questions before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
The first one is from Jason Ellis. He wants to pin you down and define what an atheist is. So can you steelman for that?
Me or Ken?
No, Kenny.
Okay.
He wants you to Kenny to steelman, basically, just to define exactly what you think an atheist is.
Oh, okay.
He should probably have listened to Steve McRae's hangout with me yesterday. That question came up.
I'm sure it did. Yeah.
I can't define atheism for an atheist in that sense, but
philosophically and colloquially, it's 2 different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, the problem of our age is, making up terms and stuff. So there's so many nuances. It's very hard to nail it down.
I would be very interested to hear what you have to say. What you have to say about it.
Maybe what they were trying to get at was when someone identifies to you as an atheist, what do you understand that to mean? Maybe that's what they're asking.
Maybe.
I see it to mean that they're moral degenerates and lower than life, and I should.
Oh shit!
I understand them to say that, look, I'm not convinced that the God thing's real. If you could show me, I would be more apt to believe it, but I just don't see that there's enough evidence to make that step.
Okay.
The dictionary says, it's a belief that God does not exist. And then others say, it is a a lack of belief, which I think that has some problems.
Yeah.
But I take atheists as being honest people who aren't convinced, because I have fallen 2 times in a very big way throughout my Christian walk. I'm approaching 50, and there were different aspects, but never fails, man. When I have a lapse of faith, here comes the booze and other things. But it was that struggle with evil and suffering. And this this last fall that I had was about 5 years ago, and it was utter despair. And it was very tempting for me to go the atheist route. What kept me from the atheist route was that the arguments that I gave today, that there's no way that God doesn't exist. But as C.S. Lewis spoke about in The Problem of Pain, and more specifically in A Grief Observed, is that, I was worried that maybe God wasn't who I thought he was. And that was a real existential crisis for me. So when I come to people who say they're atheists, I have an unbelievable compassion for them, because as they say, except for the grace of God, I might be there. So the reason why I do this, this is horrible for me, because I have an anxiety issue, and I'm very easily knocked off my kilter by, a little bit of pushback. So I hate this, but I have a concern, a genuine concern for those that don't believe, because I know that they're a little bit like me, and they want answers. They believe in reason and logic, and me, I'm turned off by the nonsense I see at church. It is so frustrating. There was a time where I even stopped going to church because, the people are just frustrating. And this is coming from a guy who pastored. I was a senior pastor for 10 years, and I have never been more hurt than by the people that called me pastor and called me friend. And, the next thing you know, there's something heinous about those that think they are holier than others.
Because I have to thank you for your candor, and as some sort of contrition, I will, full transparency, your problem of evil as a Achilles heel, so to speak. I think the fine tuning argument is something that, and Richard and I we've had some back and forth about Galatians and whether that proves that Jesus was immortal, but I've got some issues too. One other thing, if I could just pull a Ray Comfort on you. In line with that, have you ever told a lie? Yeah. Just humor me, please.
How do you know?
In my case,
how do you know that?
Have you ever told a lie?
How do you know that?
No, I'm not Saitan Brugge. I'm going to Ray Comfort you. No,
okay.
I'll just lead you down this path. Have you ever told a lie? Yes. Then what does that make you? A liar? Have you ever stolen anything? Makes you a thief?
Yeah.
Now, have you ever had a crisis of faith? Now, based on what you just said, you would say yes. And what does that make you? At least an agnostic. I don't know. I that's open-ended. You can address that later. But everyone in the live chat wants to know. I don't know why. It might be based on the Non Sequitur show, but everyone in the live chat wants to know Richard's definition of atheist.
Yeah, of course. I think the word atheist means different things in different contexts. So I think actually Ken's answer was pretty good. Anyone who's not convinced that there is a God, I would consider an atheist. If they didn't like that label, I would be fine with whatever label they would prefer. But yeah, I don't think that there is any sort of existential truth between the different versions of atheism. People use the word both ways all the time. So this to me is more of a question of what do people understand when you use the word, And I think most people that you go around, they're going to understand it the way Ken did. I think that's the reality of when you say you're an atheist, most people are going to hear that. Some people will hear like tons of other stuff. Oh no, baby eating communist or whatever. But most people are going to hear just the basics. Oh, so you don't believe in God. They aren't going to have like any specific beliefs about the nuances of lack of belief versus positive belief and things like that. Because that's a level of analysis that most people don't engage in. When they hear the word atheist, they just understand lack of belief.
Last question, and we are going to put a bow on this. You ready? I've already asked Richard this, so it would be redundant to ask him again.
Okay.
Kenny, I ask this of everyone every time you come on the show for the first time, and I tailor it whether you're a believer or non-believer. So here's your question. If there were sufficient proof for you that the God that you believe in right now does not exist, the debate is over. We've stopped talking about it. He's not there. It's substantial proof that he's not there. It's just us. It's a mechanical, materialistic world, just like we've always been telling you. How would it change your life, and what would you do differently?
I would go out, buy a 12-pack, and pick up some medicinal marijuana.
Oh, that's good. Let's go down that road.
I would.
Because
I would.
Why would you not do that now? Does that go against the Bible?
Well, it goes against my wife's wishes.
That doesn't infringe on your theocracy, though. Not theocracy.
No, not theocracy.
Theology.
No, it would be a big existential crisis for me. Because I would have to somehow figure out why I am and why I exist. And there would have to be some other ground for it. And then upon that, I would probably do a lot of investing in transhumanism research because I would want to live forever. I don't want to cease to be.
That's really good, because I do agree with that. I personally think the artificial general intelligence singularity is going to happen in the next decade. And I think it's going to change everything.
I don't think it'll be
That's
a decade.
interesting.
It'll be 50 years, and it won't be what the singularity folks say. But
how so, Richard?
Well, I think there are actual hard limits on what AI can accomplish. I think the singularity is assuming that AI can do things that it actually won't actually be able to do.
AGI, though. AGI, where it can recode itself and produce offspring.
Right. No, there are actual like quantum mechanical and structural systematic limits to what a machine can do in terms of in intelligence in general. I think godlike intelligence in terms of mechanical systems isn't going to work, but nonetheless, you can have supremely superior intelligences that can figure shit out faster than we can and can build whatever we want. Basically, ultimately, it just might take longer than we expect. I don't think it's not going to fall in our lap just instantly, but I think ultimately where we're heading is everybody's going to end up living in simulated universes. So we'll just have basically server farms that will have robots tending, and then we'll live inside digitally. But I think that's probably hundreds of years away.
Wow, that is depressing view of humanity. But yeah,
what if we find out that we are God and we created ourselves, and then you guys aren't believing in yourselves if you're an atheist?
There's
Speaking of medicinal marijuana, Kitty.
There's the solipsistic version of that where it's literally true, right? Where your mind is creating everything. But there's also like we could be in a sim right now. No, I don't buy the Nick Bostrom argument that we actually are. But it is theoretically possible.
Elon Musk says it's a 98% chance that we are in a simulation.
Yeah, he's wrong. But anyway,
I love this stuff, man. This is the kind of stuff I love to watch movies about.
I had a conversation with a physicist, a NASA physicist, about this. If you were to have a whole civilization that was inside a simulated universe, that they created their own universe and living in it, the server farm alone would generate you could just do the math. Like the server farm would generate so much energy that it would be like massively visible cosmically, like in terms of like it would be like brighter than galaxies, basically, which I thought was kind of interesting. So we're gonna have to come up with some like super efficient computer systems.
Awesome.
Before we do
Okay,
this.
that's
guys,
amazing. What would the storage for something like that, and what would the speed of the processor and the bandwidth and all that stuff? I mean, that just seems mind-boggling.
It is, but neither of those are the problem, right? The problem is each mathematical calculation it has to do anything. So every step, every flop, basically.
If they harness the Hawking radiation from black holes,
requires vast amounts of energy to do. Yeah. And then it wastes a vast amount of energy. There's so much waste heat too. But
guys,
that's a digression. But if you really want to be bothered, though, if you want to talk about immortality, I asked a bunch of mathematicians one time. I was at a conference, and there just happened to be a bunch of math experts there. If you think about it, like let's say let's say you have some sort of immortality tech. It doesn't matter whether it's simulated universe or an immortal body or whatever it is, resurrection technology, whatever. There's always a non-zero probability that it will fail. And so you might have like a redundancy, but there's always going to be a non-zero probability that both your redundancies will fail. No matter how many redundancies you have, thousands, millions, billions, there's always a non-zero probability that they will all simultaneously fail. And on any timeline extending towards infinity, any non-zero probability approaches 100%. So that actually, even with technology, true immortality is impossible. You always have a finite lifetime. But I asked them, like, is there a way that you could keep increasing redundancies so that the probability curve stays low, so that you actually could live for an infinite amount of time? And they did a little napkin calculation, and the answer is yes. Actually, the answer is yes. But it would require so much effort to constantly be creating your redundancies that it wouldn't be worth it. You'd say, like, this is too much work. Living a few billion years is fine. I'll just be okay with that.
Jesus.
Wow. Yeah, I have to say, I do know the answer to immortality. We've been talking about him the whole time, so it is there by his death, burial, and resurrection.
The cool part for you is if you're right, you get to go, no, we were right. And if we're right, we don't get to say shit to you.
I have no joy if I'm right and you're wrong.
But you're going to come up to me on that cloud and just stick your thumbs in your ears, and you're going to do it once.
I actually wrote an article a while ago that argues that only atheists go to heaven. That in fact, all religion is basically a pose is a test. That anyone who buys into religion and follows its dictates is actually lost the test, and that only atheists are the ones who got it right.
That would be. I would not be able to enjoy myself up there if I knew even somebody, a distant neighbor, even someone I didn't even know was burning in a lake of sulfur.
If I couldn't do anything about it, that would be fucking shitty. Yeah.
Jesus Christ, man.
Yeah.
Okay. Last thoughts, Richard.
Well, I think this has been interesting. It's always interesting to engage with theists, especially different ones, to see their reasons for belief and explore that, figure out and understand better. Obviously, I'm not convinced by any of it still. And for the reasons stated, and there were some things we didn't go into as well, but I think if anybody really wants to hash this out further or wants to explore more, I'm sure Ken will have some recommendations for people who want to see that side of the argument. My recommendation is to start at my website at richardcarrier.info. Explore there. I've got tons of stuff, books and various things, even recommendations of other books and things that you can find there if you want to explore that side of stuff. And I do a lot of work in not just the negative theology, not just the disbelief stuff, but I'm very big on atheists should have positive beliefs. They should have an actual worldview that consists of things they believe in and not just things they don't believe in. And that it should be coherent, and it should be evidence-based and really strongly science-based. And that includes everything from aesthetics to ethics to epistemology, all of that stuff. I think atheists really should take that seriously in building a philosophy of life. It should be their religion, is working on testing and questioning and perfecting their philosophy of life. And so people who are interested in that, I do have resources on it. My course that I'm going to be teaching in March, starting in a week or two, is about how to get started doing that. Or how to perfect doing it if you've already been meddling with it already. So my advocacy is like, even if you're an atheist, think about that, like positive worldview beliefs. How do you construct a philosophy of life? It's not just about rejecting God.
I personally am very interested in your Sheffield Carrier written debate technique. So if you can flesh that out, and that's something, I think there's a future in that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to see that happen more often.
Yeah. Kenny, final thoughts.
First, I would like to suggest a name for Dr. Carrier. I would be interested in doing that exchange and written debate, but I'm quite busy and I don't have the time. But there is a guy who I really admire. His name is Ed Fesser, and he's a professor there at Pasadena. What's that? I'm sorry. What's that?
I don't think he likes me. He and I have had words. Well, we're not like personal words, but we've been criticizing each other on our websites respectively.
The cool part about my channel is that we are a neutral space, that people that even have had words in the past, I'm not saying we've been 100% successful. Bionic Dance, an old school YouTuber, came on and debated Steve McRae about the definition of atheism and agnosticism. It didn't work out so great, so we're not batting 1,000. But if anyone wants to come on our channel, this is a good place to have a civil dialogue. I'll throw that out. All right, Kenny.
Yeah. No, and then of course I would encourage everybody to go to reasons.org. Check it out. Look at the evidence for the God of the Bible. Look at the evidence for creation. Read the blogs that are there. Reasons to Believe has a ton of visiting scholars that are experts in their given area. And then, of course, you've got Fuzz Rana, Hugh Ross, Dr. AJ, who's fairly new, Krista Bontrager, who's there, Jeff Zwirink. These are all people that are scientists and Christians. We're not young Earth by any stretch of the imagination. And I just encourage everybody to check it out. Look at the evidence for Christianity. And I think you'll be surprised that it's rational, and Christianity and theism has the most explanatory power and explanatory scope for the big life issues. And it answers everything, even the emotional needs, need for salvation, and where we come from and things like that. So thank you, Jim, for having me on. And of course, anytime Dr. Carrier wants to pull out the lightsabers and have another duel, I'd be happy to do that. So I appreciate being able to be have a friendly exchange and be cordially treated and stuff. So I've had a good time. My back's hurting. I need to sit down, but I've had a good time.
Thank you both, gentlemen.
I've had a good time too. Thanks.
It's been really good. Upcoming events for us, we got Robert Price coming up, so be looking for that on our channel. That's going to be a Skype interview. Shelley Siegel, we got in-person interview. I think we got one more trivia with her. Frank Turek in person at the end of March. Yes, the end of March, we got Frank Turek in person, and we're going to be putting that out as quick as we can. Thank you both for coming, and that is it.
Yeah. If I can say just one thing real fast. This is actually my first quote unquote official exchange with somebody of Dr. Carrier's stature. So I look forward to doing more, because it's helped me learn some things and going to help me be able to tweak some things and responses. So I'm just getting into this idea of debating atheists, in a more one-on-one kind of a way. So it's been good for me.
Cool.
Awesome. And
Yep.
also we hit close. I think we hit 73 live viewers at one point. So that shattered a previous record. And I'm not going to attribute it solely to Richard Carrier's popularity. I'm going to take some partial credit.
Take all the credit. Take all the
Thank
credit.
you, viewers, for watching. And yeah, we got a lot more in store for you. Thank you.
Cool.